All right, working on a 98 BMW Z3 Roadster. And today we're gonna go ahead and
I'll pop the hood real quick.
replace the starter assembly. And the starter assembly on this vehicle, it's a straight 6. It's actually located on the driver's side. You're gonna need a little light. It's located right down there. So you can go ahead and leave the intake and everything on and try to access it, but to me that's a lot of work. So it's just best to go ahead and remove this intake and get it out of the way to gain full access to the starter assembly. So we're gonna go ahead and do that instead. And the first thing you wanna do is disconnect your battery, make sure you have no juice, and then we'll go ahead and get started by removing all this air intake assembly, any electrical connectors that's on the throttle body, intake, the booster hose, vacuum line, 10 millimeter bolts on the rails, anything that's hooked on the intake. That's what we need to disconnect first to access full access to that starter down there. So let's get started on this. All right, with the Z3 Roadster, when you go to disconnect the battery is actually located in the trunk of the vehicle. You can just go ahead and disconnect your negative terminal. So therefore, you ain't got no charge to the starter when we go to remove the starter. All right, went ahead and pulled the air filter assembly out. It's held on by these 2 bolts right here. 10 millimeter that is held on by a clamp right here on the mass airflow sensor. All you need is a flat tip screwdriver. And after I removed that, I noted that this was cracked. So anytime you guys are working on anything, it's good that you go ahead and replace all the parts that are worn out as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this part ordered today. And as we progress forward in replacing the starter, and while doing so, you gotta go ahead and might as well remove these clamps. There's 6 millimeter clamp right here. I'm just going to lay the mass airflow sensor to the side. It's got a long enough wiring to lay right here. And then these little connectors, all you do is squeeze down and pull out. See that right there? You don't have to remove the connector, just push it, pull out. Same goes with one back here. And then you pull that, you should pretty much lift outwards like so. And then you gotta access those move your cable off to the side. You gotta get those 2 hoses right here, plug those off. There was a clamp right here. It's like a one-time use clamp. All I did was pry it out, pull it out, and then you slide it off. Then we'll go ahead and get a new clamp from the parts store, like these clamps right here, to put right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these clamps off. Any other electrical wires that's associated with the intake manifold, we gotta get them all off. Then we'll work on this fuel rail with all the injectors. So we gotta disconnect all your injectors and pull this fuel rail out and off to the side because it goes into your intake right here. All right, went ahead and got this vacuum line pulled. The electrical connectors off the throttle body. These 2 hoses, I just pushed them to the side. And I actually stuck, this is 1/4" extensions. I just shoved it in there so I don't leak any coolant. Same with the other side. So I got them both right here. There's a vacuum line that runs down here and loops around to right here. Try not to get things mixed as well. You can go ahead and label. That's going to definitely help at the end when you go to reassemble. After you get that, your dipstick right here is held on by a bolt down here. That's a 10 millimeter bolt. Go ahead and remove that bolt, move that to the side, and then now we're going to go ahead and see that bolt right here. That's a bracket that's mounted on the underside of this intake. You also have another one that's right there. So we got to go ahead and access both both of those. There it is, right there. That's 13 millimeter. Pretty much, I'm just using a long extension with a 13 at the end of it, so I get that long reach like so. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that 13 and that 13. All right, moving on the injectors. You have two bolts. One sits right here and right here. Those are 10 millimeter. Go ahead and pull those out. And then this electrical connector sits right here in between these two. Just another one of those. Push it down, pull it out, and move it to the side. You also have one that's located down here. Got to get that one disconnected as well. And then this hose right here that's hooked on the valve cover, you're gonna squeeze it right here. All right, you're gonna squeeze it, and then it's gonna come out like that. Once you have that disconnected, then it's pretty much able to go ahead and we should be able to pull this straight up and move it to the side. That's all we want to do, is just get it out of the way. Got to watch these fuel lines though, and check to see if there's any bolts that is holding the fuel lines. You want to go ahead and get those disconnected as well, which I'm not feeling anything. Yeah, I'm not feeling it. So you should be able to pull it straight up and wiggle it, and it pops out like that. All right, so all the fuel injectors should stay on the rail once the intake is up and out of the way. So now that we're down to the intake side, you got all these bolts right there. All these bolts have to be pulled and removed. So we're gonna go ahead and pull those now. All right, went ahead and completed pulling the intake. These bolts right here, those nuts, those are 11 millimeter by the way. Got them all pulled out. And then while I was lifting it out, you have to ensure that everything is disconnected underneath it. There could be a hidden wire or whatnot, or a vacuum hose. Make sure all of that is disconnected before yanking it out of there. So intake's right here, and the ones I couldn't see was this connector right here. This sits way in the back of the motor. It's another one of those squeeze and pull out, and then that little hidden one right here. And then there was this vacuum line. I went ahead and tagged it. I put a piece of yellow tape so I ensure that I put it on the correct hose. It sits right here. And now that that is complete and removed, it's safe to say there's your starter. It's kind of underneath all this. Here's your fuel lines. If you want to, you can go ahead and disconnect it. I'm just going to go ahead and move him to the other side. So I'm going to move it over here so it's up and out of my way. But we're going to go ahead and get started on removing this starter now. And of course, the hard bolt with the intake out of the way would be that one on top. So that one right there, we now have full access to access that bolt. The other one was removed by the owner. They managed to get that one out, but they couldn't get that one out. So we're gonna go ahead and get that pulled and get it out of there. Yeah, let's get that bad boy out of there. 13 millimeter. It looks like 8 millimeter on the ignition wire, and then the bolts that hold it, it's going to be this type of bolt. That's an E12, so make sure you got an E12 socket to get that that bolt out of there as well. So let's go ahead and get that puppy out of there. All right, went ahead and got the starter out. As you can see, again, that's an E12 bolt that runs on that holds the starter in its place. And there's 3 bolts on the solenoid. You have a 10 millimeter, 8 millimeter, and a 13 millimeter. So make sure you have those tools ready when you go to remove this starter. So now that the starter is out, it's safe to say it's now time to go ahead and get a new starter and get her popped in there. So I went ahead and picked up a new starter from the parts store. You pretty much get these everywhere. including online if you like. But I like to keep it local. That way, just in case the part does go out, you can warranty it, especially if it's got a lifetime warranty. Now this one, of course, you know, it's got the 2 bolts that run through it from the transmission side. Again, that's an E12 bolt that runs through here. We're going to go ahead and install this on the engine. And when you go to tighten these bolts, you have to tighten these bolts 37 foot-pounds. You got the 2 bolts. So 37 foot-pounds, torque it down, and then we'll go ahead and get started on the three bolts that goes. You got the starter or the hot wire, and you got the 2 small wires. One's an 8mm, one's a 10mm, and then the large one is a 13mm. Pretty much we're just going to snug those puppies down. So I'm going to go ahead and get this starter installed. Place it again right back as if you went ahead and removed it. And you got that alignment pin on the top side right there. Pretty much just aligns right in the same spot like you went ahead and removed it earlier. Like so. Get the 2 bolts in there, 37 foot-pounds, and then we'll get these wires put on. So went ahead and got this starter installed and rehooked the wiring on the back side. You have the 8mm, 10, and a 13. Snugged them on there. And now that that's out of the way, it's pretty much safe to say it's now time to pretty much go ahead and put the intake back on. So with that being said, you want to go ahead and make sure that the surface is clean. So usually I put rags when I'm working on a vehicle on the intake, just to be on the safe side, nothing falls in there. Go ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and remove it all, and then use a Scotch pad and clean the surface with some carburetor cleaner as well. And once it's all cleaned up, wipe it all down, get the intake, and get a new intake gasket. So that's your part number for the intake manifold, in which the gasket sits right here. We're gonna go ahead and pop a new gasket in its place, get it cleaned up, and then we'll go ahead and slide the intake right back in here. Got to remember all your electrical connectors. It's always good to mark everything. I know pretty much where everything goes. That's why I lay it in a certain position. But to those that has never really done a starter on a BMW, I would recommend at least tagging everything so you know which wire goes where. Like put number 1 there, and then where it sits, put a 1 on the connect or the receiving side. Kind of help you out a bit. So we're gonna go ahead and clean that up, get the intake installed, and then we're gonna go ahead and torque that intake. Start from the center after we get the bolts down. We're gonna torque those to 16 foot-pounds on all those bolts that run across there. So let's go ahead and get that intake in there. Went ahead and placed the intake on the head through the bolts. Got the new gasket in place, of course. It's just sitting there, just in case I need to get up underneath there. I could just move it out of the way if I miss something. While you're in the process of actually putting it down, it is important that you get there's an electrical connector that sits right here in this area behind this deal. Ensure you get that hooked up, and the one that's right there next to the starter, you can see it right here. Get that one hooked up. There's also a hose that goes on the end of your oil dipstick. You can see it right there. That goes to the bottom of the intake. So make sure you get that hooked up as well, because it's in a tight spot. Along with your brackets, you have a bracket on this side and a bracket on the other side that mounts on the bottom of the intake. Get those bolted up as well before moving on to these parts that's on the outside. You want to make sure you get the harder stuff done. That way you don't have to go back and do double the work. So once you go ahead and get that done, you can come to the top side and mount your bolts. Again, you're going to need a torque wrench. It's 16 foot-pounds, and you're going to torque it from the center on out before placing your injectors in its place. So we're going to go ahead and get the bolts put on and torque it down, and then move on to putting the fuel rail back in its place. So I'm in the process of torquing the intake down. As you can see, I'm started in the center and I'm working myself out. This is the third one. don't take much to hear that click. And you want to keep backing it back and forth. You don't want to go full throttle. There it is, see it? That's a click. Once you hear click, that's it. That's 16 foot-pounds all the way across the board. Once you do that, you go ahead and remount this little sensor right here. And then go ahead and grab your fuel rail and drop it back in its place. And those bolts that are mounted here and here, those are 7 foot-pounds that holds the fuel rail in its place. So go ahead and swing that puppy around. After you go ahead and install this, rehook up the electrical connectors. So we're gonna go ahead and take care of that right now. All right, I went ahead and hooked up the throttle cables that is located below the throttle body, these two. And one is longer than the other. So if you hook it up wrong, one cable is going to be long. So ensure the one that comes out of the firewall is your top one, and then the one that sits over here off to the side, this box, goes on the bottom. And always make sure your grommets are in good condition, and they just pretty much snap into place. See it right there? It locks right back in place. So after you get that done, get your hoses hooked back up. You have your little, there's a solenoid deal that sits right here. Get all your hoses hooked up in your harness. You have your brackets that mount on the bottom of your intake. Ensure you get those back on there to support the intake. See it sitting right there, that bracket, and then 10 millimeter. Of course, the one bolt that sits up underneath here holds this bracket as well, so they share the same bolt right here. It's 10 millimeter. Bracket comes up, and this little bracket sits inside that holds the solenoid in place. So 10 millimeter, snug it in place, and then get your booster hose back on. Just put a little clamp on here. Make sure your oil dipstick is secured. The line that runs on, that comes out of the oil pan, you have the little rubber hose right there. See that hose? That comes off of your dipstick. Make sure you hook that back up as well, and that hooks up right there, as you can see, and it goes up into this little deal right here. There's a port off to the side. You can kind of see it right there. Make sure you get that rehooked back up as well. Try not to leave any electrical connectors loose. Always make sure you double check your work before finish the installation of like your airbox assembly. That pretty much covers everything. So make sure you always double check your work and make sure everything has its home. Got your little deal that sits right here. It gets hooked back up off your injector rail. At the end of your injector rail, you have your electrical connector sits right here as well. Make sure that gets hooked back up. And it's now time to go ahead and install the airbox assembly, and pretty much able to fire the vehicle up. So let's get that installed now. Went ahead and completed installing the airbox assembly. Had the one clamp right here. You have the other clamp right here that holds the mass airflow sensor. Mass airflow sensor is made to go in one direction, as you can see the little arrow right here. So the airflow's got to go in the direction of the arrow. You have the two bolts that are right here, 10 millimeter. Tighten those down. And then I went over my work, and that's one main thing you want to make sure you do. Always double check your work, making sure every little connector, vacuum line, a coolant hose has a home and is connected together. Fuel rail is all intact, the intake is all intact. Checked all my wires and vacuum lines and connectors that are underneath the intake, and always make sure that you have a good ground. All right, check your connections on your battery, making sure your terminals are clean, your posts are clean, your electrical connectors, anywhere where it's bolted, that there's no corrosion, for a good connection between your hot wire and your ground wire. We have to now go ahead and hook up the battery, in which the battery again is in the back of the vehicle. You're going to go ahead and rehook up your connectors, and again, always make sure your connectors are clean and you have a good ground and your battery is fully charged, ready to start the vehicle. So once the battery is hooked up charged, ready to roll, you should be able to get inside your Z3 and start the vehicle. There it is. So now with the starter being installed and replaced, job completed. That pretty much completes our video with the BMW Z3 2.8 liter starter replaced. If you like my video, please hit the like button. If you'd like to follow me, please hit the subscribe button down below. And as always, thanks for watching.